I've come back with another interview. There's been a little bit of slowing down to my podcasts over the last month, and I've been into some deep exploration, but I'm picking up speed again with podcasts, and I have today a new friend. I'm going to call him a friend because I think that he is a gem of a person, and he's very earnest. His name is Matt Landman, and he is a filmmaker by trade, you could say. And he has just made a film, which he says is very powerful, on this thing we've come to call geoengineering, and many of us used to and still call it chemtrails. But Matt organized the second Global Chemtrail Summit, which was held this past month, May, in Oregon, Portland, and his presentation at that summit was very moving. I watched it on YouTube, and I was quite taken with Matt's energy, his dedication, his steam, his amount of information that he has pulled together. So it was a very good update for me, and I posted it on my blog. Welcome, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for the lovely introduction.
Well, you're very welcome. I mean, you've earned it in my book because you're one of those people who's arrived on the scene, and I think you're really going to do something. You're going to make a bigger difference. When did you begin your vocal, public, activist interest in chemtrails? I'm going to call it chemtrails, forgive me, but I am. So when was that?
I don't mind the word chemtrails. I actually use it myself. It was 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago, around today. It was May 2015 when I devoted my life to exposing this. And since then, it's been every single day. Prior to that, I was vocal and I made flyers and put a couple presentations together, but nothing like it was after I devoted my life to it.
Well, that's dedicated right there. I mean, who can dispute that? Very few people would venture to say that they've devoted their life to anything. Seriously, today people are spread very thin. They like to be diversified in their interests, and you are unique then. So I'm going to ask you this question because I remember when this happened to me. When did you see your first chemtrail and know what it was?
Right, two very different questions. When did I see it and when did I know? My personal story, it starts, well, I'll just back up really quick. I like to tell everybody that is new to who I am is that I'm just a normal person. I grew up on the East Coast. I went through the regular school. I went to Virginia Tech, got a business degree, and after living on the East Coast, I decided I wanted to move to California to pursue filmmaking. I did that. I moved to LA, and then I ended up down around your area in San Diego for a few years. And then I ended up in Northern California at California State of Humboldt, and I got a master's degree in business. I graduated top of my class, and afterwards, I worked in finance. I was a finance analyst, and finally, I wanted to get grounded, and I worked on an organic farm. And while working on this organic farm, California was in this critical drought. This drought was going on 5-6 years. And what I witnessed was drought creation. We have our annual deluge in the Pacific Northwest. The storm system comes in around late October, and it lasts almost through April of just rain. You know, it's a rainforest type environment. The 2,000, 3,000-year-old redwood trees and even the ecosystem, all of the life, it's used to this annual storm system. Well, we weren't getting that annual storm system for 5-6 years, and we were going into this critical drought. And there was this one particular storm, which is my aha moment where I woke up to something was happening. And what it was I was working on a squash and potato farm where we grew over a dozen different types of winter squash and over a dozen different types of potatoes. And it was mid-October, and we were forecast a week of downpour. The frogs and salamanders from underneath my house that had been hiding out for a year, they came out, and the entire ecosystem was ready for this storm. These black storm clouds were coming in. Farmer Paul was on the Doppler radar telling us to harvest the pumpkins, that they were all going to rot out in the field. And I was wearing rain boots and a raincoat and harvesting, expecting this moisture that everyone was anticipating and hoping for to help with the drought. And what happened is the farm is just a couple miles from the ocean, and I saw the big black storm clouds rolling in, and just on the edge of the storm pattern, a statistically significant uptick in air traffic occurred. And I'm in the rural Northern California, very rural, okay? It's forest, it's farmland, and the population is very sparse, and so is the air traffic. And so what I witnessed is not just a bunch of persistent linear cirrus cloud formations showing up, but a bunch of air traffic showed up. And the air traffic gridded the sky, and it dissipated into a white haze. They came back later on that day, gridded the sky, and the storm clouds came and didn't drop any rain. We were forecast 100% chance of rain for the entire week. No rain fell out. And I started thinking about it and asking around, and I saw it a few more times, but what I had was that seed planted in my memory bank. And then eventually someone said to me, "Oh, you mean chemtrails?" And then my research, of course, went that direction. And I realized, I came to the understanding, the comprehension that it seemed to me like that storm was dissipated via the opposite of cloud seeding, which is silver iodide. And it seemed to me that aluminum was used to disperse the clouds. And so I started waking up to weather modification. And that was in 2013 is when I first started to truly wake up. And then I like to ask, how about yourself, if you don't mind? Because I know you've been at it way more than me for a while.
Well, Matt, I'm older than you are, and I remember this thing in the sky called a mare's tail. It was a cloud that would form in the late afternoon, well, actually early evening, and it was very high up, and I had read, I was kind of like a cloud buff as a child, and I had read about mare's tails. They were composed of tiny little ice crystals, and they would form in the evening very high up. They were a form of cirrus, and they swept across the sky just like a horse's tail. They were beautiful because you'd often have the pink kind of light that you get around sunset, that pinkish, bluish sky, And I would lie on my back and I would look at them, and they've completely disappeared. So that was something that kind of lodged in my brain somewhere, but I didn't think actively about it. And I think the last mare's tail I saw was at some point in the 90s, and I was on the beach. I was looking upward at the sky, and it was late, late in the day. Now, I then had a friend who would tell me, she lived in LA, and she would tell me, now this is back in around 2004, 2004, and she's saying, "I don't feel good when they're spraying." And I would say, "What?" And she'd say, "I don't feel good on the days that they spray." And I would ask her what she was talking about. She would explain that these were chemtrails being sprayed. And I had not heard that word before, and I didn't know what she was talking about, but dimly I connected it with pictures that were lodged in my mind of these white lines in the sky. Now, we in San Diego do not have a lot of chemtrails normally. They've picked it up in the last few years. But at that time, the mid-2000s and, even up to like 2012 or 13, we were not being sprayed in the summer at all. Not at all. You would have to wait till there was ambient moisture from the winter because it's much wetter here. I mean, that's our wet season, just like you described for Northern California. And that's when we would start seeing the lines in the sky. But anyway, so this friend of mine mentioned chemtrails. I couldn't connect them with much except very, very dimly. It was almost like a pre-verbal thought. And then as soon as September rolled around and the first streaking of the sky began, I said, "That's it. These are chemtrails. This is what she was talking about." So that was my first real recognition. And then I met Harriet Phelps. Harriet was a sort of, you could call it a sidekick. That's kind of a crass word, but anyway, of Clifford Carnicom, the renowned chemtrails, aerosols, Morgellons researcher, who now has the Carnicom Institute. And Harriet was passing Carnicom's DVD around, the Aerosol Crimes DVD. She was duplicating it and mailing it out for him to people who were buying it in usually volume purchases so they could pass it out. We were back in the days when, before a lot of people had the high speed internet that would enable them to watch a documentary. Now everybody just sends links because YouTube is all high definition and everybody has high speed internet. But back then we passed out DVDs, and that's how I met Dane Wigington, Harriet, other people in the chemtrails movement. And this word, chemtrails, has now been switched over to geoengineering, which makes it a little more palatable when you're discussing with mainstream people, because they're used to the word engineering and they've heard the prefix geo, so it's not so foreign sounding and Lulu as chemtrails. But that was my experience, Matt, and I'm sorry that I sucked up so much airtime telling it. But you come from a later age. You're a younger age, but from a later chronological time period, really. And so I think what your interest and your devotion to this is really a magnificent thing. And yes, I have noticed living in California that the desiccation of California has definitely been a man-made operation, this thing they call drought. And the last couple of winters with heavy, heavy rains, I understand that that's part of the engineering as well. And it was from Dane and his work that I understood that the normal storms that were supposed to fall on the Pacific regions of the United States were rolled entirely across the country by weather manipulation and then let loose as deluges, which caused flooding on the Midwest and the East Coast. And this made all the sense in the world to me because I could see it. We weren't getting our rain. We could see it rolling over us.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really glad that you shared your story, because we have a very similar experience where someone in passing just had to mention the word chemtrails and it literally altered our lives. And so in that regard, for those listening, I mean, your voice being your weapon, it just takes a little bit to plant that seed to really change the direction. You never know. You could be sitting right next to that next Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, really influential person, and all you have to do is plant that seed, and all of a sudden you've changed the world. So, never stop speaking up.
Matt, a person that I knew many years ago who was in sales told me that the key to someone actually taking the action of buying would happen after between 5 and 8 exposures. This is how advertising works. This is why you get all of these LL Bean and different catalogs in the mail, and you're wondering, why do they keep sending me their catalogs? I'm not going to buy anything from them. And then one day, another catalog comes in, or you see another TV ad, or something is mentioned to you again, and it clicks. So this is the formula. Between 5 and 8 exposures, a sale will actually be made.
Yeah, it's funny, the more I learn about social engineering and the mass manipulation of consciousness and Edward Bernays and all those tactics that they use to get you to buy things, it's like I'd like to learn from those and use those tactics in a way that's good for humanity, to get the word out, to try to spread that, because I do have a marketing background as well, a marketing degree, and trying to get Frankenskies, the film, into the right hands without being a shrewd businessman. I want to do something good, but also, we have to play by those tactics, because people are built by those powers that be that want to frame their reality. So we have to kind of play that game.
Exactly, yeah. Now, I have 2 things I want you to describe to the listeners. One is your second chemtrail summit, and I imagine you also did the first one, and then also your film. So whichever you want to start with, tell us about either.
Yeah, I would love to. So when I first realized that I needed, or we, the world, needed a really good chemtrail documentary, I was living in Vancouver, Canada, and I started to get some traction with finding the right people to interview. I was able to land an interview with Bill Vander Zalm, former Prime Minister of British Columbia, or former Premier of British Columbia. And what happened was I realized that the movie wasn't going to be enough, that I had to build a follower base online through social media, which, despite a lot of censorship, I've been able to get up to 21,000 followers on Facebook. And ultimately, I realized I needed to not just make a movie. A movie by itself wasn't going to do anything. So I hosted the first annual Global Chemtrail Summit in Vancouver on May 7th in 2016. We had speakers from all over the planet. I was really happy to meet people like Terry Lawton and Harry Rhodes, and we had an amazing lineup. We packed the house, which was amazing. The one thing about the event in Vancouver was the demographic that attended. A lot of people were a lot older than myself. I was very surprised, and I attributed that to the younger generation. First of all, they listen to their phones, and their phones tell them that there's nothing to see there. They also come from a generation where they feel not as empowered as the previous generation. People that are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they went through so much. Women burned bras and got the right to vote. They stood up for themselves. We have dealt with so many social injustices where marches and interaction actually changed stuff. Our grandparents came from a generation where we were literally separated based on the color of our skin. So the older generation was there, the younger wasn't, and so I really realized the importance of getting this movie made and targeting the younger generation. So that's what I did between then and now is I got this movie together, Frankenskies, and then I hosted again on May 7th for the 1-year anniversary, May 7th of this year, 2017, in Portland, hosted the second Global Chemtrail Summit, and it too was a huge success. We archived everything, again, had speakers from all over the world. We had Clyde Lewis, who has Ground Zero Radio with 2 million listeners out of Portland. He came and spoke. We had former U.S. Air Force weatherman Alan Buckman. We had authors and researchers, and it was an amazing day, and people came from all over. The thing about these events that is the most important aspect of it, it's not about getting the information out there or putting the links up on YouTube or any of these things that you would think are important. It's about the people, the normal, regular people in that room coming together and sitting next to someone who is also a very normal person from a normal walk of life. Because these people who are waking up to this truth, they don't have the support network that you and I have. I mean, they just don't. Their friends, their family, their coworkers, they're not necessarily on the same page. And then they start to doubt themselves, and then they don't have that. And so they can regress back to thinking, well, maybe that something's not really going on, or I'm not going to talk about this, and I'm not going to mention it to the Sophia Smallstorms or the Matt Landmans, and then they're going to go and run with it because they feel like that the truth is, well, even the CIA has done a really good job of making chemtrails a dirty word, so having this support network and having these people come together and mingling and interacting and becoming friends with each other, it brought tears to my eyes. I have this binder that is 6 inches thick of all of these documents from the 50s, 60s, all the way up, explaining the weather modification programs and all of this, because I like this tangible aspect of it, and people can just flip through and see everything that's going on. And there were these 2 women at the Global Chemtrail Summit in Portland. They had to have been in their mid-80s, the both of them. They had never met each other before, and they were drawn to this binder, and they're flipping through it, and I started this conversation with them, and they said that they didn't have any friends that thought like they did, but now that they met each other at this conference in Portland, and they both lived in Portland, that they were going to start a like-minded group together, and they passed around an email list, and these people are coming together to form their own movement with within their circles. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, so it's a beautiful thing, and the film Frankenskies, coming out of all of this activism and meeting all these people, what it does is I mean, when I watched it just the other day, every time I go through and watch this movie, I think to myself, this thing doesn't exist yet. Like, this movie has not been made. It so much needs to be existing and needs to be out there that it's a shock that it never was done like this before. So the timeline walks you through, the first half an hour just walks you through the military industrial complex and how they have been developing research to do what they are doing today. Goes all the way back to Vietnam and even before, when they started cloud seeding and learning how to turn weather into a weapon. And when people see that there's a historical timeline to it and that it all equals what's going on now, it's very spelled out in a very simple way where you watch this movie and you're not going to be the same person afterwards, and you're really going to want a copy of that movie to show your friends. So I think I've done a good job, and now the task is going to be getting it out there.
Well, of course, yes. And you were discussing with me off the air some of your thoughts on how to do that. But I'm glad that you're going to release it as a DVD, right? And then at some point it's going to go on our favorite thing, YouTube or Vimeo, and people will watch it off their computers. But I think the missing ingredient, Matt, is the word of mouth. And you have titled it very effectively because you've got this Frankenskies, which is a play on, of course, Frankenstein, and we all heard of that movie. It's one of the iconic movies of modern history. It depicts a monster. It's actually Frankenstein's monster is the monster. Frankenstein was the doctor. But anyway, so I think this Frankenskies title is a great title, and it's got a viral potential to it. People could talk to each other. But the question is, if your audience there was in their 80s and it's the dumbed down young 20-somethings who don't consider themselves dumb, but they're deaf. They're more like deaf than dumb because they don't want to hear anything. They already think they're cool. And so hopefully that title will penetrate their skulls and their deafness and become, a word of mouth. Something, you remember the game telephone when we were kids? And you whisper something to the next person who whispers and then it comes out all distorted at the end. But hopefully this Frankenskies thing will not change shape while it's being passed around. And I've never seen it. You sent me a trailer and then there's an extended trailer, but I would like to see the whole thing and maybe try to brainstorm with you a little bit.
Yeah, I cannot wait to bring it to you and show it to you. Even in the next couple of days, I can send you a private Vimeo link. The thing about, for instance, GMOs is I try to liken the chemtrail movement to GMO because, thankfully, we've had a lot of people on the ground, activist-oriented mothers and people concerned with their health, and all these people across the globe that are coming to the understanding that GMOs are actually not good for them and that they should be labeled and that people need to be educated on the fact that a GMO vegetable is doused in glyphosate. And someone got really smart and coined the term Frankenfood. And that was able to become popularized enough that we're seeing a lot of momentum and knowledge in that field. Now, I would love to see organic really take over. And honestly, I don't think that food should be labeled organic. I think that the pesticide-ridden food should be the food that is labeled. I don't think that the organic, you know what I mean? Like the organic shouldn't have to be certified and go through those hurdles. But just like that, chemtrails, solar geoengineering, tropospheric aerosol programs, stratospheric aerosol injections, solar radiation management, all these terms that are meant to confuse, especially the younger generation. I really hope that just Frankenskies, that term, and getting this film around can get the youth looking up and questioning what they see and actually open this conversation up, because the dialogue needs to be there. And the way I see it is it's a generational attack that the powers that be know that the people in the know, such as yourself and myself, we're a generation that won't last forever. And that if the youth below us doesn't have the information, the truth brought forward to their generation, then it'll be completely lost to the generation following them. So it's our goal to keep that, or it's our task and our obligation to keep that flame alive for the generation after that, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. Otherwise, I mean, did you see the social engineering, how they just came out with 12 new cloud names, one of them being Cirrus Homogenitus, the chemtrail clouds?
I heard that in your talk, Matt, that I watched on YouTube, the presentation you gave at the second Global Chemtrail Summit. And there are all these, I mean, that by itself, it sounds like a joke. It sounds like there's another one, something mutatus or something like that, right? I mean, these
Correct.
names sound like they're out of comic books, like they are literally jokes, but they're not. And people are so unfamiliar, for instance, with Latin, that they don't even understand how these, to them it just sounds like some kind of Latin word, but they don't even recognize the root in it. Mutation and homogenitus, I mean, to me that has all kinds of different flavors. But the question really is, Matt, the new generations, the upcoming generations, are already embedded in artifice. Artifice is a part of their lives. For instance, I walk by people, where was I that I saw this? It was in some outdoor setting. It might have been the pool, it might have been the beach, and people were sitting in their chairs. I think it was the beach, and they were sucking pink and blue fluids out of plastic bags, you know, these little plastic squeezable containers, and they had another little foil thing with cheese, something written on it, which obviously was a heavily processed cheese food of some kind. And I thought to myself, there is no way I would sit and eat something like that. I'd rather be hungry till I got home and had something real to eat, you know? So that's what I'm saying. These generations are steeped in artifice, and they're so used to their monster, you know, movies and their monster and satanic skateboards and t-shirts and all the cacophony around them that is steeped in satanic and destructive themes and memes that I don't even know if they would be bothered. They would bat an eye that the skies are being, you know, altered in this Frankenish way.
Well, one thing that I touch upon in every presentation that I give is the consolidation of media and the control that they now have over the populace. Like, if you are plugged into the television and watching these regular programs, you are being conditioned. And there is no avoiding it. Even you and I are programmed to a certain extent. And the thing is the youth, they believe their electronics and their screens more than their own intuition. So they're taking authority as the truth versus the need to take truth as the authority. And so they are spoon-fed whatever the powers that be want them to think, and they leave the movie theater without even realizing that the movie has ended. So they see things in real life, and they're still in that brainwave state of thinking that they're conditioned to thinking that this is just okay. And the more that the envelope is pushed, the more that the youth are engineered. Really, it's a mass consciousness manipulation. But I can't help but think that there's going to be a pullback, that there needs to be, and there must be some sort of backlash where the new generation says, hold on just one second. I'm not going to get the iPhone 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to revert back to my old ways and learn how to farm. And what do you mean? All the sugar beet companies have been bought by Monsanto, and that our seed qualities have been diminished. That there's all these things that are being lost that are very, very tangible and valuable. That I feel like that there's a true awakening on the horizon where there'll be a backlash and people, especially this next generation, not the kids that are 20 now, but the kids that are 5. The kids that are 5 now, they're going to come into a world that they are not okay with. And they're going to learn from the parents. It comes down to the parenting as well, but they're going to learn that a change needs to occur and that the engineered society and the engineered weather and the engineered food is not something they want to live with.
The kids that are 5, aren't their parents, you mentioned parental influence, but aren't their parents around 30 or 35, maybe even 25? So I'm just wondering how the more discerning parents are going to actually create a wave in this upcoming generation, how they're going to do that. Because I'm glad, how old are you, can I ask?
Oh, of course, 36.
All right, so you are one of the people who presumably could have a 5-year-old. But I just don't see that this wave of 20 and 30 somethings is really going to care enough. And the way I view the Hegelian movement that I have witnessed in my life, for instance, I'm going to start because you're fond of speaking of food. You may not remember, you might have been too small, but for a while back in the 80s, everything was all natural, all natural. It was just leading into the term Whole Foods, and we now have that chain called Whole Foods. But we had all natural this. It started with granola, the granola movement, and Nature Valley, and all these corporations were making all natural granola and then all natural bread and whatnot. And that was spurred by the tiny organic movement, because in the 50s and the early 60s, we had a ton of packaged and processed foods hitting the market, and the housewives were all happy because they didn't have to cook for hours. They could just open a can of baked beans and save themselves the trouble of having to, slave over a hot stove for all that time that it takes to make baked beans. And that spurred the antithetical move, which was the people who said, no, we don't want to eat this canned and packaged food. We want to have natural food, real food. And so the corporations, the very same big food companies, Kellogg's and whatnot, that had made all those packaged processed foods, they got into the natural food movement. But it wasn't organic per se. It was just called natural. That was a deceptive word that was thrown on it. And what we're having now is we're seeing big agricultural companies become certified organic, or they have divisions that become certified organic, because that's the popular movement now. But certified organic does not really admit a lot of small farmers. For instance, in California, to be certified organic, you have to pay thousands of dollars every year to the agricultural department, and you have to also pay them some percentage of your net profit. So that is unaffordable for a lot of small farmers who prefer to just put up the sign, if they're at a farmer's market, that they're pesticide and chemical free. But I've seen the ag people come over and tell them you can't have that sign. You have to always have either certified organic or you don't put anything up. And now I'm going to get into the whole topic of chemical fertilizers. That's a secret wing of chemical, invasion into food that's even organic. Organic food can be grown with fertilizers and still be termed certified organic. So it's only the very small farmers who are extremely ethical and rigorous in the way that they grow food who prefer not to put any chemicals whatsoever, whether they're in the form of fertilizers or pesticides. But we have all these, what I'm trying to get at is that we have all these nooks and crannies that are very dim and murky and gray, and yet the big movements, the observable movements, employ very simplistic terms like all natural, organic. Yet all natural doesn't mean organic, and organic doesn't mean free of chemical fertilizers. So the Hegelian push into the consolidation of large entities taking over what used to be a very diverse, much more chopped up, and much more interesting market that involves so many smaller entities. It's the same thing that's happened with the media.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, and I do see that. I do see the consolidation of everything, the consolidation of media, the consolidation of corporatized everything, the consolidation of farmlands. I actually am a firm believer that the drought in California and now the potential of a flood season this year because we got so much snowpack is all about just hurting the small farmers in California and consolidating into big ag. And I I heard one of your interviews recently talking about the chemical fertilizers and how back in the 80s and 90s companies were even getting away with taking the coal fly ash from coal burning power plants and taking that ash and passing it off as lime. Is that correct?
It's not just the coal fly ash, it's the baghouse dust, the flue dust, all the crap and crud that builds up as wastes from many different kinds of industry was given the green light to be retermed as not a hazardous product, but now simply a product that could be mixed in with fertilizers and sent back to the land. So I'll just say it I'll give a quick synopsis. A long time ago, when we had the industrial boom after World War II, we did not yet have the environmental consciousness that we have today. That came a little bit later. So for that time period, companies, smelters, refineries, synthetic rubber companies, all different kinds of industries, they would just dump their wastes on land, empty, unused land. They figured it's land. Let's just throw it there. Nobody cares. And that, after consciousness started to grow for safe disposal of hazardous materials, we started to get much more pollution and toxification of rivers and so forth. And the EPA got more active, and they said you've got to dispose of this in a safe manner, which is very expensive, of course. These companies had the brainwave of putting the wastes into a silo and then turning them around the very next day and sending them out of the silo as materials that could be combined with fertilizer products such as nitrogen to be placed back on land, farmland at that, because all these materials that were poisonous and toxic in these high concentrations that aggregated in factory chimneys, for instance, arsenic, barium, strontium, aluminum, manganese, lead, all this stuff, that it constitutes what we call pollution now and toxic waste. It is part of the periodic table. These are all earth elements. They exist in soil and earth in very small amounts. So why not? The thought was, why not just mix them in with fertilizer, give them to the farmers? And what happens is that when crops are dusted with this stuff, they will actually become injured. They have the classic injury response, and they grow wildly. And so the growth spurts that one saw with the use of these products were actually a response to injury. Over time, though, the crop becomes weaker, and many other things were not done to fields. They were, for instance, plowed, and that's not good, and they were not left to lie fallow for a couple of years and have natural turnover in terms of fertility from all the microbes and whatnot that live in the soil. So the modern farming methods were very aggressive, and they injured the crops, and that brought the pests. The pests come to wheat crops. Everything that's starting to decay and degenerate and die gives off resonant frequencies which bring in the detritivores, which are the population of decomposers on the planet who start to take things apart and break them into their fundamental components, and they become the basic nutrients and elements that then get used by the producer level of life, plants and whatnot. So that's what starts happening. Once you injure crops, you bring in the pests and they start to eat at the crops, and that became the beginning of the wave of chemical pesticides. So now we have both in use, chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizers.
So at the Global Chemtrail Summit just now in Portland, I was very fascinated. There were researchers there that weren't on the lineup for speakers. So I gave a few people their time to stand up and submit their research. And this one gentleman, he said that his entire research was on following the money. He would go with the Air Force and figure out where they were getting these chemicals from. And he said that there were direct train routes from these coal power plants that were taking this coal fly ash, taking it in a slurry mix when they rinse it out of the filters, and taking it directly to the Air Force base. Now, the coal fly ash has these metallic nanoparticulates such as the strontium, the cadmium, the barium, the aluminum, and the Air Force just has to run it through a quick refinement process to have their chemical concoctions that they use in their patented atmospheric aerosol program. And it really made me start thinking that these power companies, they have been figuring out a way to essentially poison the land and the people and all of the biosphere with these contaminants from their coal burning. And once people started waking up to, oh, well, they're putting it on the soil, they're using it in the chemical fertilizers, they just turned around and started spraying it in the chemtrails. Have you heard about this theory?
Well, I haven't heard about it as a theory from anyone but you and just now. And actually, Marvin Herndon, he has written a book. He's a professor at UCSD, and he wrote a book that explained that what was in the sky was coal fly ash predominantly, and that could well be. There are other elements that are contained in these aerosolized sprays that they use. So I'm not quite sure what the composition is of coal fly ash, but it could certainly make sense that the power plants, not only do they supply the source of the fly ash, along with other additives perhaps put into the mix, but they are pumping enormous quantities of steam into the air through the wet surface air coolers, and that generates the content of moisture for the atmosphere that the particulates that are sprayed will draw to them, and this is how you get a stable trail in the sky, or a perpetually effervescing trail rather than a disappearing contrail, which is a very different kind of occurrence. So our chemtrails may in fact be produced by the joint combination of fly ash of various kinds with other additives and the steam, the water vapor that goes up out of these plants through the WSAC system, right?
So to note, they're purposefully putting through these wet surface air coolers and these cooling towers. It's not a portion of the cooling system like in the power plant. This is a separate utilization of the power plant where they are producing steam for the sole purpose of saturating the atmosphere to work in conjunction with the chemtrails, correct?
We have a great need for power. We are enormous consumers of power today. And the plans to alter the weather and the activities that alter the weather require moisture. Now, I did observe for many years, Matt, that in the western United States there was a lot of people said, oh, they stopped spraying, thinking that they weren't going to do it anymore. But it was during the summer months primarily that spraying of aerosols seemed to die down. Sometimes in San Diego, we didn't see any chemtrails of any kind from May till September or October. And typically the western United States, being composed of a lot of desert, and dry, scrubby land and mountains is arid and therefore doesn't have natural supply of moisture because moisture evaporates off the ocean and off heavily forested and vegetated land. So I remember when I lived in Pennsylvania, I was just sometimes so distraught that we had so many heavy cloudy days in the summer and they were so humid. And that was because there's so much stuff growing there. So green plants release moisture and they make for a much cloudier weather pattern. But here in the western United States, we didn't have that. So we didn't get a lot of atmospheric moisture that would then condense into chemtrails when certain aerosols were sprayed. Now, I just want to throw in here for review purposes that the atmospheric science out of Hebrew University in Jerusalem produced the headlines a long time ago that pollution stops rain. And the scientist Daniel Rosenfeld was the one who announced this publicly, that cities that were heavily industrial and polluted seemed to have less rainfall. And I believe that was the stepping stone into the manufactured aerosols that are very, very small particulate size. So the smaller the particulate, the more it will form a stable haze layer. And the larger the particulate, natural particulates around which raindrops form, because raindrops are condensation drops of condensation that adhere to particles that are usually salt or dust that are natural to the earth. The ocean releases salt and dust comes off the land, and those are both hygrophilic in that they love water, so water gloms onto them. So those are natural clouds. They're made out of condensation nuclei that originate as dust or salt particles. And the fake stuff, the chemtrail white haze and the chemtrails that fan out above us, those are aerosols, other kinds of aerosols in very small particulate size that then bring to them, they're hygrophilic as well, they're metallic salts, a lot of them, they bring to them the atmospheric moisture that conceivably is pumped by these cooling towers, and that forms chemtrails. And the smaller the particulate, the more stable the condensation drops are. And when they're gathered into a big blanket together, they will be the white haze. And then they can be destabilized with NEXRAD or, frequencies, agitation that's, again, man-made.
So I really do want to get into NEXRAD and Doppler, and I'd like to get there, but I just had an epiphany, and I'd like to just back up to the power plants just for a moment. So during my evolution of research, I was advised to sign up for Google Alerts, and I went into Google Alerts, and I put in the word chemtrails. And so every time the media put out any sort of publication, even if someone on Craigslist types the word chemtrails into their post, I get an update, an email. And every day I get an email, and it's a list of all of the different articles on chemtrails. Well, then I felt like I was super smart when I learned about solar geoengineering. So I went back into my Google Alerts, and now that I'm so educated and enthralled, I put in geoengineering and solar geoengineering. So now every time the word solar geoengineering or chemtrails comes up, I got notified. And I started receiving more notifications and reading and digging into these different articles. And so as my research developed, I started digging into the bibliography of the different articles that I was finding. And through this, I happened to run across this TAPDOE reference. And so digging through that, I realized that there's other terms that are used, very, very blatantly used, but as long as the powers that be think that the activists are only searching for stratospheric aerosol injections, solar radiation management, chemtrails, solar geoengineering, then they can publish these different papers not using those key terms, and totally it's hidden in plain sight. Okay, it's still out there, but we're not able to access it as easy because our keywords, our smart word geoengineering, isn't included in there. And so as we're out there and the debate has been framed for us, they're behind the scenes. And so when I dug into this TAPDOE, I found this document, Tropospheric Aerosol Program, TAP, Tropospheric Aerosol Program, from the Department of Energy, DOE, TAPDOE, from 2001. And this paper from 2001 details the entire program. They show how how they laid out different aerosol plumes from jets over the city of Nashville, and what they did, and how many different devices they needed and drones they needed in the sky to sample the rates at which these things dissipated. And they set up the budget for the chemtrail program and everything. But in this entire document, the word geoengineering and the word chemtrails was not used. But it was a program hosted and funded by the Department of Energy. So I'm curious to look back and see how the Department of Energy, who of course is correlated to these power plants, what kind of role that they play. Also, when we were talking about the parents, the 30-year-olds now that have kids, and how are they going to raise kids that are awake and aware, I couldn't help but think of how polarized everything is. To divide us and conquer us, there's this polarization of almost everything. And we live in a world of duality, so it's really easy for the Hegelian dialectic to put you in this problem-reaction-solution where you're completely polarized against your neighbor on every single topic. But in that regard, I can't help but witness a backlash. So I do have friends that have virtual reality goggles, and their 7-year-olds using it, and their 5-year-old can't wait to be 7 so that they can use these goggles, and the parents are upgrading to the next version, and that family is going to be totally dialed into this virtual reality goggles where they're going to be completely brainwashed, right? But there is the backlash there where I've got family friends who have witnessed that, and they are just disgusted. And they say, yeah, I've seen people just hand the kid in the stroller an iPad and walk away. I refuse to let my children have that experience. And they explain to them, no, I'm sorry, sweetie, the screen pulses at a rate that's actually bad for your brain when it's developing. And they show them the truths that otherwise, if they weren't disgusted, they wouldn't be so prone to bring their kid up that way. So I do feel like that there is hope in the polarity, that there will be a backlash. But back to the tropospheric aerosol program, I do feel like there will be an interesting connection the more that we research into this coal fly ash and the power plants and the plumes. You sent me earlier this cooling tower wet surface air cooler that through NASA, that they have these very, very small devices that can just crank out moisture to increase the moisture level of the atmosphere, to give those condensation nuclei, to increase the level of condensation nuclei so that the chemtrails can persist. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that. And I believe that NASA is not to be trusted. I think we're learning that now, that NASA, in conjunction with all of these other 4-letter, 3-letter agencies, that they're the ones to look into, and the deeper we dig, the more truth we're going to uncover.
Yeah, Matt, the Department of Energy is basically the Department of Defense. This is all the same thing. And NASA is a defense institution. So defense, or whatever they want to call it, war, they used to call the Department of War, that changed to Department of Defense, and now it's all called energy, I think. But this is all part of the thinking. It's grand scale destruction and alteration and overwhelming. I read that recently in somebody's book, the overwhelming of nature. And I want to point out the website, weatherwar101.com. This is a very good resource for learning a lot more about these cooling towers and how the storms are generated across the country. He keeps a very close watch on storms. He does a video for just about each and every storm that comes through America flooding people out of their homes and causing all this catastrophic destruction. It is a massive manipulation of human energy. I mean, population dislocation is part of the strategy here so that they can herd people into areas which they can then control, because they will tell us that, otherwise you're going to be stuck with all kinds of weather hazards. We're putting you where it's safe. We've developed structures for you to live in. We'll give you sandbags. We'll have military protection. We'll even have artificial weather in these areas because the weather of the earth is so bad now. So there's a lot of consciousness twisting that's going on, but I really urge people to visit Weather War 101 and make that. He has a YouTube channel as well, tons and tons of YouTubes, and a very good website resource. I think you have been aware of Weather War 101, Matt?
Yeah, I'm really, I have a new website, actualactivist.com, and I featured Weather War, was it Weather War 101, right? I featured that site and your site on the new website, and there's just so much information to learn, especially with the new Doppler. I've witnessed cloud creation via satellite out of pure thin air. And once I came to the realization that there was a weather exchange where weather futures are traded on their own market, where if you know what the weather's going to be, you can predict it. Well, if you can manipulate the weather, you can predict it. But weather is traded on an open market, just like stocks. So what I see is the powers that be, they control the weather, and then they create a permanent revenue stream by placing these bets on this exchange. Are you aware of this?
Yes, I am. And also insurers are getting into the weather business, where you get these giant umbrella policies from huge insurance companies. I think Swiss Re is one of them, but they're global companies, and they are definitely interested in, mostly as commercial, but now we have separate flood insurance in California. We have a California Earthquake Authority where you have to buy insurance for earthquake coverage. So these are all subparts. They're ways to make money. They deceive us, they manipulate things that are natural, and they get us to start investing in our security and safety through policies and programs that they offer us, which are supposed to help us out if these eventualities occur. So it's a big money maker. It's tremendous.
And then what do we do to wake people? I mean, it just seems like the plot thickens and thickens, and what we deal with is this cognitive dissonance, especially people who are new to it. We end up with so much information that a newbie coming in, they want it simplified, and there's no simple explanation when you dig down this rabbit hole and you get to Morgellons, or that the weather's been controlled for a couple of decades, or even people are finding terbium in their rainwater. Do you know about terbium?
No. What's that?
So terbium is a rare earth mineral. It's very, very, very expensive, and there's only a handful of mines. And people that have been, curious about what's going on in their skies, because they see these Frankenskies and these insane chemtrails, they've been testing their rainwater, and there's different locations, especially in rural northeastern Canada, where terbium is showing up in the rainwater, nowhere near any sort of terbium mine or anything like that. And once you dig into this, terbium is used to create plasma in plasma televisions. So there's just this insane agenda in our skies where they're experimenting and doing research, and now, like I said in my presentation, they're normalizing it to a point that they are telling us that they're going to block out the sun slowly but surely through research to save us from our carbon emissions, to save us from global warming, that we are on this timeline where we're up against a conditioned majority that thinks that this is actually a good thing. So you use the word geoengineering, and people who think that they're in the know think that they know that this is a beneficial thing for humanity and that they want it to push forward because they feel guilty about their carbon emissions.
You know, Matt, they're using the earth against us. They're saying that we have misbehaved through our lifestyle choices and our giant energy consumption and burning of fossil fuels and all that. Now the earth is reacting. The earth is taking it out on us, having revenge, and the weather patterns are evidence of that. And so they're going to get us to agree to all this further manipulation as a defense strategy. It all comes from defense. And yes, I'm aware that they are going to darken the skies unnaturally and filter sunlight out. And this has a lot to do with my interest in biological darkness, because that will capsize the welfare of many, many life forms, I mean, in the aggregate. And we're going to start seeing deterioration and degeneration of life, which will allow them to come in and install synthetic biologies, synthetic life forms, and combinations of natural life and synthetic life. And then the darkening of the skies is all part of that theme of darkness, Matt, global darkness, and darkness being a more than a physical thing. It's a metaphysical darkness. It's the whole Luciferian program of destruction and death. It's a death culture that they're building.
Well, I can't help but think that the Morgellons agenda would thrive in a darker environment where the pure golden sunlight doesn't exist to kill the fungal and the bacterial and all of these viral aspects that we need the ebb and flow of the daylight and the moonlight to sustain. I'm getting a little bit from your research. So I know we're running short on time, and I really am intrigued with, so I really am thankful to have met you and to start digging into some of your stuff. And it seems like we have a lot of things in common, especially on the health side of things.
There are many different things we can look into to improve our chances, you could say, before this synthetic tsunami takes us over, right? That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I actually agree with you completely. I've been kind of coming to terms with there's no avoiding it, but there will be a version of humanity that has taken health into their own hands, that has detoxed and chelated and has built their gut biome to be something that can sustain this onslaught. But the people that aren't taking their health into their own hands, that are still drinking Coca-Cola and are okay with the fluoride and the GMO and the vaccines, they are going to be a version of humanity that merges with AI, it seems, and I can't help but think that we're going to witness this in our lifetime. And I really pray that we have a big enough backlash where we have a humanist movement to sustain humanity, to keep our genetics alive, because it's up to us really to take our health into our own hands, to learn and research and to empower ourselves with this truth, to pass the truth forward to the next generation so that everyone knows how to get this stuff out of us and how to sustain.
Yes, Matt, that's very well expressed, and the conviction you have comes through. I mean, as long as we're here, we have a choice about how we want to be. We really do. On very fundamental levels, we have a lot of choice-making ability in that regard. And you can be blissfully ignorant and get taken over, but the second you get woken up, whether it's by someone else's efforts or repeated exposure to earnest people who are trying to help you, or some fluke occurs in your own brain and you go, wow, how did I not see that before? Well, then you have a lot of different paths you can go down, and you can still resuscitate and regain and recover. And then, I don't know whether we are reincarnated or what, But I will say that while we're here, it's our duty to learn. I don't want to say defend ourselves or protect ourselves, because it's our duty to be the best and most that we can be. And everybody gets the chance to do that.
Yeah, very well put. Yeah, if we are reincarnated, let's create a world that we're happy to come back to.
Absolutely. So on that note, we'll conclude for this session, and I would love to speak with you again. I really would like to see the film you've made, and I urge people to look for Frankenskies. Matt, what is your website again? What's the preferred website that people can go to for updates on your release and your conferences that you're putting together, because you are quite a doer here?
Oh, well, thanks so much. So I'm really young at heart, and I really have this ability. I do a lot of grassroots activism, and I pride myself in my ability to walk up to a 12-year-old or an 80-year-old from any walk of life and be able to look them in the eyes and to talk to them about these topics, whether it be 9/11, vaccine injuries, chemtrail, anything. All of these things are under the umbrella of truth in my eyes, and I want to get it out there. So it is my life mission to get it to the younger generation. So in that regard, I'm attempting to create this kind of brand, this kind of awareness, truth movement under this umbrella of actualactivists.com. But you are an actual activist. I am an actual activist, and I want to encourage the youth. I want to light these flames under the butts of these young kids and give them the power. And I want there to be more actual activists, and I want you to be an actual activist, the listener. So I created actualactivists.com. I have a Facebook page, Actual Activists, and on actualactivists.com, it's broken down into health, GMO, chemtrails, fluoride, and vaccines. And there, I plan to have an interactive ability for people to venture out away from social media, such as Facebook, where you're censored, and to start communicating with people that are like-minded on a platform where we can share and grow and discuss, because these conversations need to be had. So for now, I'm just posting memes that I hope people can steal, information, articles, and links. But I'm learning how to web design. I'm just going to be building this thing up. So actualactivist.com, I hope you can visit it. And it's going to be changing. And my trailer for the film is there. The film will eventually live there as well. There's a GoFundMe link to pre-order the DVD. So thanks for looking.
Matt, thank you. I'm very happy to know you. It gives me a feeling of robustness, that there's someone out there who's as energetic as you are and devout as you are. I'm very, very happy that we crossed paths again and you agreed to this interview. So for now, listeners, it's going to be over. I like to wrap these interviews up a little after an hour, but now I'm programming my poor guest to be saying, oh, we're running out of time, when the fact is we aren't. I say that as a natural, this is when it starts to whittle itself down. But yeah, it's been my great pleasure to have you on. So thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you for everything that you've done and for being a pioneer in this movement. Without you, there wouldn't be the truth that's moving forward to people like me.
Well, Matt, that's awfully nice of you to say. And you and I are going to stay in touch. We have some more discussion to do after this show, I'm sure. But thanks for the audio interview, and everybody's going to be hearing from you and looking for your film, I'm sure. So Frankenskies, everyone. Frankenskies on actualactivist.com. Hey everyone, this is Sophia. I want to tell you about iodine, which I've been selling on the website avatarproducts.com. That's my online store. Iodine is a mineral that the body needs pretty much more than any other mineral. Iodine goes to every single cell in your body. It's crucial for reproductive system organs. It's crucial for the thyroid. The thyroid makes 4 hormones. It can't even make them without iodine. And what has happened We've started to make thyroid hormone out of bromine, fluorine, and chlorine because they resemble iodine so closely as molecules. So we're getting brominated thyroid hormone, chlorinated thyroid hormone, fluoridated thyroid hormone. And those hormones regulate so many different systems in the body. No wonder we're falling behind in our cellular detoxing and housekeeping. So if you visit avatarproducts.com, you're going to see 3 different kinds of iodine. You can get a trial size for only a few dollars, 1/4 ounce, and that's a good place to start. So help yourself and feel better. Reminding you, visit avatarproducts.com where you'll find a number of things that I have discovered, or I've even designed in some cases, that have solved problems for me. Visit avatarproducts.com.